want you to know that Greg operates with military precision, so it was like at 0800 I'll be there, and I appreciate thanks to all you guys for coming out for Friday's quarter session. Sort of unusual today. We've got more defense and folks involved in government IT today than we've had in the last 5 years, that I can remember. And I'll tell you why this is happening. Because Greg reached out to me, and I socially, with the exception of all my friends being at MUSC, I've got one other guy who works at BAE Systems, and he said the same thing. But at the same time, Greg was saying the same thing, which is the companies that are focused on defense and government are now in a position of wanting to acquire companies, commercial companies, number one. Number two, I'm hearing now more and more that defense companies want to collaborate with the commercial companies to speed up innovation. So I think that, I sit with the senior team at SRC, and everything I was thinking at that table, basically the 6 or 8 people, including James Ward, the former head of civilian head of SPAWAR, validated what I was thinking. So from my standpoint, I think it's very important. Kevin's a great example. Basically, just come on in. He's basically a software development shop. Sort of a hired gun, if you would. He's been working on both sides, commercial and defense. And so there's value for if you're going to be doing more government work to just kind of learn how things are changing. So consistent with that, for me, it's all about connecting the dots. When I'm overseas, I get this email from Andrew McKenzie. Andrew McKenzie is the head he's the IT leader for the 628th Squadron at the Air Force. I joined Base Charleston. I had no idea, now that I'm a honorary commander, I guess I have a better handle of what they do. I didn't realize that the Air Force and the 628th maintains Coast Guard. They're down at SPAWAR doing stuff. They're the brig. They're all over the place. So they're responsible. And I didn't realize how it all works, but I have a good handle on it. So he says, we've got Colonel Adams, who's the new wing commander for the 628th, who's come in. So the colonel reaches out to me independently, but then Mac reaches out to me. I guess Mac reports and says, hey, we want to get together with all the commercial guys. We want to establish a brain trust. Yeah, so essentially what we want is a brain trust. The U.S. Air Force in Charleston the colonel wants a brain trust on speed dial. So he can call, So I think this is the first, starting out, Greg's going to start, he's going to give us a little bit of background on the company and then get into it. But I really would like to do more with, from separating basically commercial and defense 15 years ago. Now I see them kind of converging. And selfishly, this creates an opportunity for all of us in this room, including the Charleston Digital Board. So with that, I'll let Greg introduce himself. He's the Senior Director for Market Development at Scientific Research Corporation. He'll tell us a little bit about his company and then kind of get into what he's learned. And with this, it's all about takeaways. I'm sold. How can I go get it?
Yep.
So thank you, Greg. Appreciate you being here.
Great, thank you. Good morning. So I wanted to share with you just a short little video clip. I sent this to Ernest back in March before his trip overseas, and this was kind of what set the stage for, hey, let's get in here and try to have this collaboration with you all. So it's a short little clip, but it's got some music in the background, so don't worry about not being able to hear all the audio, but it's got some key points. This was in March, essentially last month, in New York City. It was a Shark Tank. It was the Air Force's version of Shark Tank. And it's amazing is that they actually awarded contracts in 3 minutes. That's absolutely unheard of in the federal sector, as you probably know if you have. And what we're thinking is that, or we know for a fact, this is sort of the start of this huge appetite for ideas in the federal sector. And we're talking about how we can capitalize that on here in the whole country. So I was actually fortunate enough to be one of the ones that pitched in New York City and selected. So I actually had an interesting experience. One of them was, was that it actually took me 12 minutes to get paid because I tried to use PayPal, and PayPal has $10,000 increments. So I had to switch over and set up a Square account, which has a $50,000 increments. So a typical SBIR, which is a Small Business Innovative Research, is phase one is $150,000. The Air Force purposely made it an extra $8,000 to cover the fees, knowing that we're going to do a credit card transaction. So they absorb that burden, not the small business. And they also authorized 40% of that day. So in 12 minutes, I got $63,000, which was kind of cool. And it's not my day job. I mean, I was pitch hitting for a small business to doing this, by the way. So I wasn't doing it. SRC doesn't qualify, but it just shows you that there's this coordinated effort to not only bring in small businesses, but bring in what matters, and that is the cash flow. I mean, the guy in charge of the Air Force, Will Roper, he's the senior executive agent for the Air Force. He knows that what makes or breaks a small business is cash flow. And he wanted those folks that got selected that day to leave there with, money in their pocket, because so many times you get a defense contract, your first thing you do then is go out and get a loan. I mean, you'll get a guaranteed loan because you got to get a defense contract, but you're going to pay, a loan shark. And then you're going to get guys trying to sell you insurance on protesting and other kind of stuff. I mean, the list goes on. And then you end up focusing on that versus doing the work, and then you don't even really have any ability to sort of work on the follow-on. So it's kind of like, it's a game of chess. You got to figure out the next move, not the current, in order to survive. So what I want to talk to you about today is, I titled this sort of the defense market doing business at the speed of ideas, which is, in itself is an oxymoron, because defense business and speed typically don't go hand in hand, and some of you know that, and we know that on the large business side. So there is some changes that I wanted to highlight. Here's what I want to talk about. I want to give you a little bit of background on myself and why I think I'm sort of not necessarily anybody of any specialty, but I do have some sort of hard knocks expertise in some areas that could be very useful. Talk about defense innovation, some of the immediate challenges, how to create value if you guys want to participate in this arena, and then how to turn some of these ideas into money, and kind of where to start. So I want to keep this kind of interactive. I know we got like an hour slot, but please feel free to chime in as we go, and especially if you don't understand something, because the defense business is a foreign language. I mean, there's a ton of acronyms. I mean, when Ernest was rattling off the numbers on the Air Force, group whatever, some people are like, have no clue what that means, because there's a designation for every command. There's a chain of command, and there's a bunch of acronyms, and there's a funky collar of money, and it's a whole different mindset. If you get in the defense business, it's a different set of accounting standards. It's a different set of certifications. I mean, so it appears as a really large barrier of entry, and what this is trying to do is, some of these coming out is really trying to lower that, make it, credit card transaction, firm fixed price, lower the certifications and oversight. So hopefully it's going to be of interest. So my background, I've got, as a techie, I'm an old fart. I'm almost 30 years, but I did do 18 years as a civilian in the Navy. So I managed research projects at the Office of Naval Research for rapid response. I worked here in the lab, what used to be, back in the late 90s, it was Naval X and the shipyard. It combined and formed this group called NICE East in like 1995, and they brought in some folks from Norfolk and Maryland. Then that changed to the name Spay-War Atlantic, or Spay-War Charleston, and then they grabbed New Orleans and Norfolk and became Spay-War Atlantic. It's in the old shipyard, so I mean it's in the old naval base. So if you know where the paper mill is on 526, kind of behind that is a naval base. It's got a consolidated brig on it. It's got the Navy Nuclear Power School. Spay-War is a huge tenant on it. There are about 4,300 civilians now, and they pump through about $2 billion worth of work. Not all to the low country, but a pretty solid amount. There's about 10,000 in the defense industry here. Spay-War just changed their name to NIWC, N-I-W-C, Naval Information Warfare Center Atlantic, about 6 weeks ago. So they call it NIWC. So NIWC Atlantic has about probably $8 to $10 billion economic impact here. So it's pretty serious. It's the largest employer of engineers for the state. It does kind of feed a lot of the Tri-County area, and certainly the defense side too. So for me, I did that as a civilian, and then I went off for about 10 years and did a small business. I focused on bringing disruptive technologies to market. Keith in the crowd here, he and I have been consulting off and on for several years on his awesome technologies. And and there's a few others locally in town, and then some international ones. And then since last June, I've been with SRC, which is a large business, and they predominantly are the #1 provider at Spaywar in terms of the local footprint. There's about 900 and some employees here locally, and a lot of a lot of systems engineering and systems integration, not a lot of research and development. I've taken technologies to market. In the federal side, there's programs called the Rapid Innovation Fund, the SBIRs we just talked about, the standard BAAs, there's cooperative agreements called CRADAs, and then there's this new thing called OTAs. New in the sense that it's sort of in the lingo today. It's been around for 20 some years, but it's a other transaction authority agreement is what it stands for. And it's really geared towards the people that typically don't do business with the government and trying to fast track that relationship. They call them non-traditional providers. But it's a really quick process, and the NIWC Atlantic Lab here now has a consortium that manages it, and they actually are starting to kick off these ideas. There's a group here that used to be part of SCRA called ATI that got spun off and sold to Answer, and now they're up by Somerville. They actually manage consortiums for a living. That's what they do. They manage about, 15 or so different federal consortiums. They're managing the one for the NIWC Atlantic here. So if you know ATI folks, if you know the NIWC folks, Bob Miller in the crowd is actually one of the NIWC employees. So it's a very simple process to get engaged. It's like a $250 a year annual fee, and you get exposed to the challenges, and you get a chance to participate in actually providing ideas. And it's good. And companies like SRC or other ones, Booz Allen, Centurion, all the other large guys, they actually partner with the small businesses for those ideas. So it's a really good opportunity. Commercially, I've taken some products to market, mostly in the outdoor hunting, gaming area, but it is a different animal, and I'm sure you guys are very well versed in this, but just handling the distributors, the manufacturer reps, the big box stores, the online stores, I mean, it is a totally different animal than the federal side, but it's all about, obviously trying to figure out how to manage your margins. I mean, it's a different pricing point. The federal government research typically is non-diluted. They get no equity. You can use that money to drive a commercial strategy, providing you can keep up with the pace or the lack of pace, to feed your pipeline. On the commercial side, it's all about, bottom dollar. I mean, there's no doubt it's a race to the trying to squeeze out every piece of margin to get it. So anyway, but I've had background on both. Some of the tech examples I've done I've done some free space optics, program called Lightspeed, one called Beam, which is the ability to detect optical devices looking at you. It's kind of a military counter sniper, counter surveillance project. And then some of the, we got a project with NASA to actually manufacture fiber optic cable in space in a zero gravity environment to get pure fiber. That's actually just got launched on the SpaceX last month. And then sector optics, which is the commercial side on some of that. So I put this up there just because to me it's important when I listen to a speaker. It's like, nothing more frustrating than listening to a small business advocate that's never been in a small business, or a contracting advocate that's never done a contract. So I kind of feel like that, at some point in my life I've done a little bit of some of the stuff I'm talking about, and I can definitely relate. Currently I'm with SRC, it stands for Scientific Research Corporation. These technical areas that we're dealing with right now, and a lot of the folks in this area, in this arena are here in town, is cybersecurity, offensive cyber, cloud development, forensics, both cyber and physical, biometric forensics, DevSecOps, the intel systems, data analytics, and the integration on vehicles, ships, vehicles, and other platforms. We have about 930 folks, about 1,400 total across our Huntsville office and others. And what's interesting is that I say 60% cleared TSSCI. What that means is that everybody, like 60% of the company, not only has a security clearance, but they have like sort of the top level of security clearance. So it is a very niche workforce in the fact that not everybody can get cleared, and not everybody actually are sort of cleared coming in. So it's really challenging. For example, we have a huge demand now, about 35 to 38 a month. We're trying to hire cleared software developers. I mean, good luck. It's like, it literally is a competition for talent, not only here in Charleston area, but not only us, the other guys are hiring as well, including the federal lab. So, we're trying to recruit folks from all over, but we also realize that, there could be some synergies here with you all. I mean, either as potential employees, employers, or partners, or what, because, some of these tech areas you're doing now for, medical, financial, the other areas that easily apply to the defense sector. You may not have security clearances, but you know what? That's not a big deal because there's a process, to do that. And some people may not even want a security clearance, and there's nice firewalls where you can sort of still do development and R&D work without having to have one. We got about 104 square feet just right across the street from the naval base there on Remount Road, and about 15,000 square feet of lab space. So as far as Department of Defense innovation, I mean, if you're not familiar, but historically, things like the internet, GPS, radar, microwave, weather, air travel, all can be traced back to the federal R&D dollar, particularly in the defense sector. So there is some, amazing stuff that's come out of this research. It's not always immediate. I mean, some of this took 20, 30 years to get in the market. But there is a lot of history of the federal R&D, in particular defense, partnering with some, academic folks and basic research folks to then produce, the next generation of ideas. In the defense area, we call these things offsets, and that's over time we've had these periods where we the Defense Department made these intentional investments in key areas to sort of stay ahead of the enemy and sort of drive the market for everybody to try to play catch up. In the 50s was sort of the first one, and that was the nuclear weapons thrust. And the second one happened in the 70s for precision guided weapons. So then the question is all right, what happened in the 90s? What happened in the first of 2000s? I mean, the Defense Department did lag quite a bit, and the rest of the world sort of caught up. So this third one is kind of a question mark. I mean, there's things like AI and robotics and key areas that defense is putting money in. You can see here hypersonics, but you also can probably argue that each one of these is maybe playing catch up on our side, not necessarily on the enemy side. So it's a huge competition globally, and we recognize that. Here locally at the lab at NIWC, they have technology thrust areas, and these areas are listed here. I'm not going to go through them all, but some of them, are self-describing. I mean, they're terms that you see in the commercial area, like mobility and autonomy. Sometimes they're like BSA is battle space awareness. It's a little bit different mindset, but Internet of Things, embedded systems. I mean, these are where they're trying to put their focus in from a technology side, and a lot of it will have to leverage the commercial side because, and that's where a lot of the challenge becomes. I mean, for example, trusted electronics. I mean, we all have, devices that are probably not produced in this country, but yet we're using them for applications that are very sensitive for national security or whatnot. So, there's folks that try to figure out how to put wrappers around it or guarantee there's no counterfeit malware, guarantee that it is a trusted system, and there's a lot of energy in that area. So there's a lot of resources looking for good ideas. MBSE is a model-based system engineering. So it's if you're not familiar with that term, it's got a lot of buzz now in the federal sector, and that's basically, if you think of the system engineering model where you kind of start with requirements and break it down, to system level and then try to validate and verify and test, they call it the system engineering B. It's to try to digitize that entire process, and a lot of it is, up front is things like, models for, systems design and whatnot, but then it gets really complicated when you're getting down on, systems on a ship that's been there since 1950s, and you may have a two-dimensional AutoCAD drawing if you're lucky and an old operating manual. How do you digitize that? And that's the challenge, is because what you're trying to do is you're trying to make decisions on how to modernize these systems and virtualize them, and it's like some of these are systems that are 50 plus years old, and so there's a lot of effort going in that arena. Some of the technology challenges I put up here on the top right. This is dated when the iPhone X first came out, but if you look at just the sensor component to it, that company that breaks down all the bill of materials basically said that, the accelerometer, gyroscope, the electronic compass, the barometric pressure, light sensor, total cost, bill of materials was $2.35. I mean, that's not the glass, that's not the metal, it's not the processor, the bulk of it. I think the total BOM is like almost $300. But it goes to show you that kind of capability in a handheld device, in the 90s on the military side would have been $2 million bill. I mean, easily. Mm-hmm. And to figure now you can get it for $2. So it's like, to my again, this is just my view. I mean, the Defense Department is getting out of trying to develop that stuff themselves, because look at that cost. Now we figure out how to bring in, exploit it, use it for other cases. So we have a huge challenge on the people side, not only from the global perspective of the lack of science and technology, engineering, and math here in the United States, but just on the commercial versus federal side, because the federal market, it may or may not be of interest to a lot of the areas that the defense wants to be in. So how do you incentivize that? The Defense Department just started an office a couple years ago in Silicon Valley called the Defense Innovation Unit, and they're trying to get early stage investors in with ideas, and the defense wants to be part of that. They want to contribute to it, and they want to it's so many times that a good idea will come into the defense, then the defense will throw money at it, no problem, but they'll also constrain it because they want it to match 100% of their requirement, and it's got very little ability to go out commercially because they're pretty much have a gold-plated solution that nobody else would buy. Then if the Defense Department changes tunes or backs out of it, then the company's kind of left holding the bag, So it's kind of going in with, all right, how can the defense put some money on the table to leverage the commercial markets and then hopefully drive affordability. And then the pace. I mean, the pace of technology, you guys are all familiar with that, but that pace balanced with the decision-making pace has always been out of whack. And maybe it's coming closer now. Maybe this sort of fast-tracking resources will improve that, but it is still a challenge. And then also just the transactional challenge. I mean, to do business with the government, I mentioned that you pretty much have to have a new accounting system traditionally. You've got to have all these oversight on cyber certifications. You got to have all these, they call it the FAR and DFAR, which is the regulations. And I think somebody said it weighs 19 pounds or something, I mean, just the paper of it. I mean, it's literally like this tall. And it's the Defense Department, in terms of acquisition, it's such a low risk that they always continue to add oversight requirements, but they never take any away. I mean, you still got some, I got one as a small business a year ago, and it still had like Y2K clauses in it. I mean, it just goes to show you that, they're great about adding stuff to it, but then nobody's job is to actually lean it, typically. And also too, the barriers of entry and challenges to survive and continue. And I say survive and continue because there is a sense of dying on the vine here, because if you get even the SIBR, the pace between phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 could almost be a decade or at least 5 or 6 years. And so it's like, how do you survive the in-betweens, and how do you plan for alternative resources or maybe even alternative defense resources to keep it going? Because you got to have a pipeline. You're hiring people, obviously, and you got a team of a half a dozen, and you're constantly thinking, all right, what they're working on next and whatnot. And then the last is the user's environment, and people don't necessarily realize this, but we think of like things in here that we take for granted, like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and cellular. It's always there for us for the most part. And in a warfighter perspective, that's not always the case. It could be environments that are contested, denied, denied either by the enemy or denied by ourselves. We tend to sort of jam the enemy as a countermeasure, but we end up crippling our own communications a lot of times. And they also could be unavailable. I mean, if you're underwater, your cell phone's not going to work. I mean, there's alternative ways to communicate, or if you're in a cave. And then also too is not desired, because you are giving off signatures. I mean, you are giving off locations and potential links that could be detected or compromised. And then you also have these soldiers carrying around all these gadgets, and everybody's adding a new gadget, and guess what? That requires new batteries, and that requires more cables. And just that itself is, they have an enormous amount of capability, but if everybody comes in there with 4 AA's, the next thing you know, they're carrying 19 or 20 of them, and then it's like, then you got a guy just nothing but carries batteries. And so you got to keep that in mind. And I mentioned like some of the scenarios, whether you're on a metal ship in the middle of nowhere, or in a cave with absolutely zero light and connectivity, or underwater, how does your systems work in that area? And the challenge is that they want that iPhone X low cost sensor, but they want it to work in this environment. So I mean, if you got ideas to harden that to make it work, I mean, that's definitely some opportunities. And then just the classification of the workforce. I mean, in the technology side, it's not as bad, but as your technology gets applied, it's when it quickly becomes, in a classified area. And it's chicken and egg, because it's really hard to innovate inside a highly classified environment because the entry of ideas is so limited, because a lot of the guys are already sort of in it. You're kind of just choosing from, you know, the group. You're not necessarily having open doors to get outsiders in. So we constantly figure out ways to try to insert technology into these areas.
Great. Just sorry, a quick comment about your last thing. You mentioned the OTA, the Information Warfare Research Project, is a good entry point for people who are struggling with classifications, because a lot of the work is done in an unclassified environment and then is delivered on the classified side. So
Yep.
you need a smaller workforce to deliver, and you can use a larger workforce to implement.
Absolutely
So
right.
It helps quite a bit.
Yep. Good point. Okay, so some ideas on sort of creating value. I mean, if you have an idea and you feel like you want to bring it to the table, I mean, you know, what's the value proposition? First one, I think, is understanding the customer and the uniqueness in the environment. I mean, it's really, you know, easy to have a commercial product, but if you really understand how it's going to be used in the defense sector and the uniqueness of that environment, you definitely can build. And a lot of times too, is, as you guys know, when you're designing stuff up front, you know, the cost of making changes, that kind of changes, is minimal versus once it's developed to a product stage. So it's incorporating some of those ideas up front. And I put in there, you know, seeing is believing. There's a lot of venues now where folks want to do experimentation, they want to do demonstrations, either in on the military bases. They'll actually open the doors and allow you to come in if you got something of value, or in venues. Like in Tampa, there's this organization down in Ybor City called SoftWorks, which is like the experimental side of the Special Forces. They encourage this sort of bring in, show us what you got. And it really is easier for the decision makers and even the users, you know, to obviously touch and feel something, play around with it. And because there's not a lot of natural venues to do that, so they're kind of purposely driven. So they typically will target a particular technology area. And if you got something, I mean, I highly recommend getting plugged into that. It's not necessarily paid for. It's sort of on your own nickel, but it's a very positive use of limited resources. And then, you know, people always say, oh, you got to dumb it down for the government, you know, and it's not necessarily dumbing it down. It's just putting it in their terms. I mean, that's probably, you know, sales 101 for you guys, but is to really understand that, you know, the person acquiring the device in the defense sector is not the person using the device. So you got to kind of play that little bit. If the users, you know, want it, then the guy will buy it. If the guy, you're trying to sell something to the guy that users don't know about it, then he's like, well, they're not, you know, the most frustrating thing is that they say, well, there's no requirement for it. Well, yeah, but you know, but they don't even know this exists, so they can't generate a requirement. Mm-hmm. So then you got to kind of go back and, all right, how can the users understand this so they can ask for it, and it becomes this circle. But it's a game, and there is a way to play it, and it could be very, very, very useful. There is a risk culture. I mean, they want something, you know, for the most part that works 100% of the time, 100% of the time, you know. So it's like, all right, how can we have a negotiation where, you know, they get what they pay for, it's a capability, but, you know, they don't need the $10 million toilet seat, you know, thing, you know. So it's one of those things where they got to understand that there is going to be some limitations, but managing that up front and defining that actually helps add the value as well. And then this readiness and maturity level in the defense sector, particular, they use this term TRL, technology readiness level. So they got these sort of levels that I think NASA generated the definition from 0 to 9, or from 1 to 9, that shows the maturity of the technology. And you know, once you get past development, you get into like, you know, lab demonstrations or demonstrations in a relevant environment. That's when you start really getting a lot of interest in it. So a lot of the funding will actually define what TRL level they're looking for. Is it really just a crazy idea, TRL 1, 2, 3, or is it something they want to see working in an environment of, you know, trying to detect a drone, for example, on a base or something like that. So then you're looking for something more mature. So it's important to understand that. And then also too is, I mean, everybody's system is plugging into a larger system or a larger, you know, capability, is to understand that dependencies, because, you know, they're all about wanting this universal standards and open architecture environment, and you know, it is what it is, but you know, it's not necessarily always profitable for everybody to come in and just give everything away. But at the same time, is you got to understand to make yourself more valuable is how other systems can depend on you, because then you drive your value up if you're the critical path of a particular capability. So not being closed going in mindset is actually very valuable. And then the last is that, at least for my 29 years, I've never seen innovation, the appetite for innovation as high as it is now. It is from even like the large businesses, because let's face it, we got more resources than we do ideas. The defense side, same way. You guys, for the most part, represent folks that got more ideas than resources. So it's a natural match, and figuring out ways to collaborate that. We're all, at least part of us are selfish and want to do something here. We all come to work in Charleston and survive here. But we got a federal lab, we got academic, we got small businesses, we got large defense businesses. There's got to be a way to mine all that and put ourselves on the map and largely keep everything churning here locally, because then we all benefit.
Rick, a quick question on,
Yeah.
so, you talk about these acronyms and this process and, and such. I think the reason that we've been somewhat successful, is being able to translate what companies need, to the city, and just kind of taking care of it. A lot of times making it go away and that kind of thing. So in the way we serve as that sort of concierge for these smaller businesses, who are, resource challenged. And even if you're not resource challenged, I'm in the middle of my own project, $54 million. The permit didn't come up because they've got 997 Morrison. Well, when the address we started was 999. So if I'm selling something, a clerk will hold up your project with $54 million basically, and they're delaying the closing despite that. So I'm able to step in and say, okay, let's just fix that. Is there somebody who translates, and this has been the big issue for me as well, is there somebody who translates, when you say understanding the risk culture and understanding readiness and understanding just the systems are different. They're wonderful systems when you get in, but just in trying to get in, it seems daunting to a commercial guy who is, oh my God, man, I just don't have time for all this.
Right.
Is that something that SRC now is doing? Is it something that Booz is doing? Is it something that BA is doing? I'm just curious, basically, who's the translator? I've got this great idea. Let's talk about Keith. He's sitting with his 5 patents, and there's, he's been in there basically at the highest levels, so he understands it. But what happens with somebody who doesn't understand it, who has something that is really in demand?
Right.
How does that happen? Who's translating?
Well, that's a good point. And even Keith's example. I've been working with Keith to try to crack this nut for 5 or 6 years, and it's not easy, because you kind of have this like perpetual false starts, and it's like to the point where it gets frustrating. And even to Nywick Lance credit, there's 4,300 people over there, and not all of them are decision makers, and you sort of, a guy that a working level engineer that thinks it's cool is great, but could they really make a difference? And it's part of it is navigating. I do think that the larger defense, even the small defense industry, people in the defense industry in general have a really good ability to translate, where the right pockets are. That being said, other than here recently with this IWRP OTA, there hasn't been this sort of like call for ideas like I've seen, and I really think that hopefully this will improve that, because we, in SRC, I'm trying to get folks motivated to kind of have this sort of roster of who's who in these areas, and and to just go to them, because they're going to waste their time and energy to the point of being frustrated trying to go to us. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's almost like we got to find them. And Nywick has that a little bit, but I don't think they have the natural motivation to do that like the industry guy does, because for us it's a competitive advantage. Because a lot of our defense guys and industry folks, they tend to sort of laterally rotate around town, because they work at different companies doing different jobs, because they're sort of expertise in that system. So there is a lack of, all right, what's the next generation of ideas, and it's probably not currently in the defense sector, and that's one reason why I had SRC join the Digital Corridor 2 months ago, was that we want to get plugged into this. And I'm sure Lifecycle and Booz and the other large industries here will do this, have done the same, or will do the same. Is that we don't have a lot of internal R&D resources. Usually we use our money to chase business, not develop business. But there is this appetite for, all right, how can you bring a small, great idea in, possibly acquire it, but if not, just sort of front it and be the complement to it, and that is, understand the environment that's going to be put in, understand the integration of it, understand the support of it. That's not what the small guy wants to do anyway. I mean, he wants to develop that idea, to my opinion, develop that idea, and then use those resources to generate the next idea, and how to continue to feed that innovation while it's still being delivered and resourced. So it's a good question. It's a challenge. I mean, this is my last slide, and so this is basically what I was saying is, how do you turn this into dollars? And I think understanding the why, and that's as much on sort of the large business as it is a small business, is understand the purpose of the technology, because translating an operational requirement to a technology requirement is hard, and translating a technology solution into the operational arena is even harder. So we got, like I mentioned, we have 40% veterans in our company. Probably that number is probably as equally in the other defense industries as well. Enormous amount of retired military folks work at these businesses. They're experts in their system, they're experts in their field, and those are the folks that can give you the no kidding, hey, this would work or this wouldn't work from a user perspective. And it's pretty much, free advice. I mean, we start developing these collaboration opportunities. We can bring in, easily bring in an expert in the, Navy communications area or whatever, and you guys could drill them, and vice versa. I mean, that could be some future collaboration opportunities. And then also follow the money. I mean, clearly there is public accesses to databases and congressional dollars, that are described and shows you where the money is being put. Those defense focus areas clearly have money in those areas. So, obviously you want to go after something that's got some resources. And then understanding this new pace. I mean, so what I did in New York City was what's called the 19.1, which was the SBIR in 2019.1's the first quarter, topics. The 19.2 topics will be out probably, they're supposed to have been out 2 days ago and they got delayed, so they'll be out probably in a week. So then there'll be about a month or 6 weeks window where if you looked at them and you got a cool idea, you could go pitch, but it's just like, if you didn't know those exist, you didn't know where to look, how do you find that, So it's a lot of that is just understanding that, and they are seasonal. I mean, it's essentially a farming model. I mean, you plant your seeds and then you grow it. I mean, you can't just plant it any time of the year, I mean, there's certain times that you can pursue this, and you tend to beef up the proposals, hoping that a small majority of them hit down the road. Yeah.
So, sorry, what was this 19.1, 19.2? If you could elaborate on.
Yeah. So in the Small Business Innovative Research (SBIR) model, all across all the federal sector, not only DoD but NIH and what other 10 agencies have the SBIRs, they have sort of quarterly calls for ideas. And 19.1 just means, fiscal year 2019, which started in October. The government is October to October. So it started in October, and .1 means the first quarter. So that's, October to January. So the 19.2 should be coming out here really soon. It'll probably go all the way from May and June, and then sometime in June is the cutoff. So if you just did a Google on SBIR, you'll see that. You'll see the list. And my contact information's on the back. I'd be happy to help you guys out. I mean, I still am a huge advocate on trying to grow some of this. And we could even do an SBIR workshop here. I mean, SBIR pays local guys. There's a couple in the state, I think, that come here and actually do seminars, and then they'll try to pitch you on writing your proposal, But I mean, and that's good or bad. It's just not my model. But I'm just saying is that understanding where to pursue this is half the battle. Yeah.
When you were talking about requirements, so it just lists out areas of
interest,
like nuggets of.
The one that for the pitches is very generic on purpose. It says basically, do you have an idea that'll benefit the Air Force? In these three areas. One of them was like digital, cyber technology. One of them was communications, and one of them, so they're kind of a little bit focused, but they're generic in purpose. And for those pitch ones, it's interesting because it's only a 5-page write-up, which is not that difficult because of that 5 pages, like 2 pages may be technical stuff. And then the other 15 pages are actually a slide deck, similar like you would give a pitch. So it's very much they're trying to come to your guys' level to interact, so they're actually asking for slide decks and asking for pitches and that kind of stuff. And even the pitch itself was 5 minutes. I mean, when I went up there and gave it, it was a 5-minute pitch, which for the government, it's usually death by PowerPoint, I mean, so to say 5 minutes, it was a huge challenge, because I mean, you just want to cram everything in, and but that's what they're trying to get to. They're trying to get to that level. There'll still be traditional topics that require 20-page write-up, in a key area, but there is, each service will have, I don't know, probably, I mean, several dozen of topics. I mean, there's no shortage of topics. And also too, I say consider partners to complement. I mean, SRC is a partner. The other large defense industry guys are partners, and I would say complement, because that's the natural. That's when it comes together naturally. If you're going with a large guy that does the same thing you do, they're going to try to hire your people. They're going to try to hire. I mean, that's just the nature of the game. So if you go in there with saying, hey, we offer A, you offer B, together we can offer C. I mean, that's sort of the ultimate relationship. And I did say prepare the pitch, because these guys are getting into the pitch mindset. And what the Air Force did in New York City, for example, they claim they're going to spread out to the field, and they're going to do it at the other bases all across the U.S. So I don't know if we can get a pitch down here, but it'd be kind of cool maybe to have them come down here and do that. That'd be kind of fun. And then showcasing in relevant environments. I mean, for example, at the old naval base where Niwik Atlantic has their big facility in their lab, they do have they have an outdoor racetrack that the Customs and Border guys used to drive on for training, and now it's a drone facility. So they basically try out drone payloads, and they fly. They can actually, jam that area because they got permission. And so you can test out stuff, and you could do a cooperative agreement with them. And if you have a cool drone or a cool detection or defeat solution, you can try that out and get their sort of assessment, and then figure out how to take it to market and show that it's already got some meat behind it. So that sells pretty well. Even in the, I'm not as knowledgeable on the cloud and the DevOps side of it, but there's a very similar motto where you can actually, I mean, the Air Force has this project now called Kessel Run, which is a rapid software development a model, and I encourage you to check that out if you're in that area. And then last is plan and build for the follow-on in mind. So I mean, I love this model, and I think BBN back in the day sort of had it best, and that is that they had the resources to develop, Gen 1 of their product, or almost Gen 1, and then they would sell that to the government, take that money and actually deliver Gen 1, because it was almost 80% done, but then take that money and develop Gen 2. And it became sort of this spiral where they were constantly going back and offering the next generation, and that's how, a lot of federal R&D guys sort of made a living, is to use that money to sort of reinvest in the next iteration. And but you got to have something to get started. I mean, you can't just come up with an idea with no meat behind it, because then you'll end up all those resources developing that first idea, and it's tough to figure out what's next. So some ideas on where to start. There's a website here called the Defense Innovation Marketplace. It has a list of all the SBIR. It has a list of there's a solicitation link on there on all the cool ways to get federal R&D money. The Special Operations Forces down in Tampa actually publish what they call hard problems. So those are kind of always, if any great ideas there, tend to sell pretty easy. Just understanding Defense Department 101, the organization, how does the lab here feed into the higher echelons and into the food chain? How does the operators, impact, acquisition, and then also the budgets. I mean, that could be a separate workshop on that area if there's interest. And then locally here with the lab, there's the link to the iwrp.org, where you can actually see the topics, you can join, you can check it out. And then the lab also is doing these technology exchanges, where it's kind of like a request for information. If you got a cool idea in an area, tell them about it, and they'll set up like a matchmaking thing where they'll bring in a couple experts and they'll talk to you about it. It's a good way to get exposed if you don't know the folks and the people. And they actually host those tech exchanges at Trident. The next one is, I think, sometime in May 21st, I think. Large business partnerships for, the Defense Department and the guys at Niwik Atlantic. Sometimes they actually set aside work for a small business. I mean, just, there's this sort of statute, I think, congressional requirement to have so much business set aside for small businesses and then disadvantaged small businesses. So you can look at that as a way to, you know, try to tap that pool in some areas and maybe bring in a large business to support you with that because, you know, in the clearance information, you know, like the gentleman mentioned, you know, not everybody's going to be cleared, but you bring in a partner that's got a facility clearance and cleared people, it could be very useful. There's traditional R&D sources. There's exposure, like I mentioned, at some of these places. SoftWorks is in Tampa. Every service now has a rapid capability office, rapid equipping. The guys in Tampa, they go around every quarter and do a technical experiment where they throw an idea. If they like it, you show up with your gear, and the users actually. And it's kind of a nice little trade-off because while you go in on your own nickel and showcasing it, they're bringing in true operators to give you a no kidding, candid assessment. I mean, they'll tell you if it sucks, they'll tell you if it needs to be different, you know, size or whatnot. And that interaction at that level of the product development is huge because you can make changes still, and you know, and you also can get a little bit of buy-in or feedback from the users to see, you know, what would it take for them to, you know, to use it. And then there's challenges posted at the Defense Innovation Innovation Unit. At the federal level, challenges.gov, there's no shortages of, you know, harnessing these ideas. And one thing I didn't address here, and this is the last slide, is that the IP factor. You know, I think a lot of small businesses, obviously, your IP is your holy grail. So, you know, I'm not well versed on how to posture yourself going into this arena with that. I mean, I clearly would, you know, suggest articulating that up front. I would hope that the defense folks and the large business folks would be very mindful of that. And a lot of times, if they're not, it's not necessarily them trying to take advantage of you. They just may not be aware of what's important to you. You know, so I think that is a negotiation or a conversation has to happen. And you know, maybe at some point it's worth getting an expert in that area. So with that, here's my contact information. Any questions or?
I got a comment.
Sure.
That one slide on the 6% investment that a company should do for R&D. That's always been an issue. Are you really putting money back into keeping your think tank guys around?
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought the thing about the intellectual property. I basically had to walk away from this last job because they wanted to possibly suck in an idea, right? Because they own your world, they own where you sleep and all that stuff. It's too bad that these companies don't share the patent. I understand the company pays for your time, they should have an idea that is patentable, but I think an incentive there would be the employee keeps the patent. Okay, now can you walk away? Yeah, walk away. Let's keep innovating. This is a country here.
Right.
But, you know, it's capitalism, so
Right,
we can't
right,
have
right.
that, right? But it's so funny, the business guys make the big decision on the patenting, and they don't come up with patents. It's funny how you all keep your money.
Right.
But back to your other thing, I'm working with a guy right now, and this is happening. Small business has an idea, they fund it for 2 years, they're gonna take that idea and give it to a big business. You better patent your idea. Of course, what's the cost of patent? $10,000 to $20,000, unless you do it yourself and wait 4 years. It's just so you talk about that, these big business leaders, but they really don't follow up on it. And then the last thing is, I think this country's done software development, and there's great software development going on the last 10 years. But they've come into ownership like they're the inventors of the software that they put together. And that's been the problem. I think that's why we're having to stand still and call for innovation, because the software development got everything in place, and a great job. But the innovation, they talk about this neural network, TensorFlow, and all this machine learning. They didn't invent it, that's from the 1980s for crying out loud. But they take ownership. So I think that's what we're seeing now, is the software development's in place. We haven't invested in scientists. We haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Cool. Thank you.
Well,
So
on the issue of patents, Greg, I mean, I think, you know, I'd be curious to hear Keith's, you know, Keith's been in the world
Yeah.
basically, in and out, you know, in commercial defense and that kind of thing. So what's your take on what Greg had to say about, you know, protecting and patents and the big boys, you know, sucking it down, you know, after you?
It's complicated. So from the government perspective, it's best for the small business to have already spent their own money before you approach the government. If you show up to the government with an idea and you've done nothing on it, and Greg, correct me if you
You're absolutely
see
right.
it a different way. You walk in and the government basically funds you to implement that idea. The government's in a very strong negotiating position for them to have most of the rights.
You're right.
But if you've already sunk your money into it, your time, and you've pushed your idea into some stage of reality, then it really weakens any negotiating leverage that the government has. You just have to stand up for your own rights, right? So you negotiate hard on the intellectual data rights, but you've got a good, strong position, right? Because you've implemented something. So that's one aspect of it. I do take difference with $10,000 to $20,000 for a patent. If you, again, walk into a patent attorney and just lay an idea out and ask them to patent it, yeah, they've got to write everything. It can get expensive for them to do a good job. I mean, almost anybody can just kind of, quite frankly, half-ass something together and get it through, right? But it's not going to have any strength if it ever gets challenged. It won't really be worth that much. But if you have implemented something and you know your field and you can kind of do some of the, the prior art, review yourself, if you can write up a description of what your invention does and then walk into a decent patent attorney that's really, we use Greg Finch, right?
Licensed.
Yeah, licensed, but also not one of these that's just, feeding in the trough, right?
Yeah, slapping it together.
Yeah, so he's just interested in getting paid, but, so there are different flavors of patent attorneys. We like Greg, been dealing with him ever since he showed up 7, 8 years ago. We've got 10 patents now, something like that. 6 or 7 awarded.
Yeah, and
3 or 4
on
more,
average,
what?
cost of what?
Yeah. Well, because we do so much of it, right? Basically, on a lot of our patents, Greg writes the claims and we do everything else, right? But if you get a good patent attorney like that, you can be down to just a few $1,000s. You're
That's
not
my
going to get
point.
anywhere close to 10.
And that's my point. I've seen Keith do this over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Just knock down these patents, and I think it's very important to. I mean, that's where we can be helpful. It's not 20. Basically, we can get it down to 5. That kind of thing. And listen, the reason we're having this conversation, because I'm sitting over here trying to figure out how can I add value for Greg, and how can I add value for all the folks listening to this presentation. If you can't even tell people when the 20.1, 2020.1, 2019.1, when they open up an account, just think if you're interested, you may want to look here. I mean, that's, at the end of the day, we're just, we're sort of servant leaders to the industry, right? Very specific industry, so it's a concierge approach. And that's what I'm saying, how can the CDC be helpful in a tangible way? I mean, there's everybody that's sitting out there saying we're happy to help, and then you scratch the surface and no damn value. It's just like, why am I even here wasting my time? So what we're trying to figure out with Greg and your senior team is how can we bring value to the industry? And what we've got is a flock of commercial guys, who have that experience. And at the end of the day, this is why Charleston Pros was created in October. Then I got busy with buildings, haven't had any time to, but I'm going to get back into it and say, Greg is a great example of, if you're thinking about basically, playing this game, you might want to basically buy lunch, buy Greg lunch and just hear how the game's played if we even kind of go through it. So he's a pro tied to, on both sides, commercial and inside the house, and that's the thing, is don't waste your time with these guys. Exactly. I mean, I can't tell the number of SBR guys who pitch me on, I want to come and give a workshop. I'm like, oh shit, I mean, another one? From all over the Southeast. The small business guys over here should do it for free.
Right.
Because they're paid by the federal government to do that. So I'd rather go to somebody like Greg who just cut through the crap and basically just tell me what I need to do and then decide I want to pursue it. So we're getting back in this market. I've got to sit over here and say, am I going to get back in this market? Greg's convinced me that, and James, we can exercise some leadership, but it's in a way that I'm accountable, for what we do and that kind of thing. So, yeah, the patent, I mean, I absolutely hear you. You can't go through all of this and, then somebody steals the idea and just kind of runs with it. And it's happened.
One more question. The SBIR grant process, then this pitch that you went to New York, what's the difference? Because those grants go through and are reviewed.
Yeah, so that actually was sort of like a fast track phase one, and so they're in this next round they're going to do it again. So it basically, I mean, it was kind of it was kind of a proof to the guy in charge of the Air Force, Will Roper, that you don't need to create a workaround of the existing models. We can just speed through the current ones. So he said, all right, we got this thing called SBIR program. You know, it's got 3 phases and it's got this defined process. But why do we need to wait 90 days to tell the guy he got selected and wait another 3 months to tell him, here's your contract, another 3 months to say, here's your first payment? You know, why not just say, all right, we like it, we want it, here's the first payment. So, you know, for that model, what they did was the slide deck I presented, that little 5-minute slide deck, counted as a deliverable for the contract. So, I mean, literally, I got like, hey, thumbs up, you're selected, escorted to another room, and I got a 1-page contract, which that in itself is remarkable because a government contract is usually this thick. A 1-page contract, signed it, and then they whipped out the Air Force has a credit card. They have a credit card, and they said, all right, you know, how do you want it? You know, square or whatever, you know, and you know, and it was funny because Will Roper, you know, you can see that video. I mean, he spent, I don't know, $8 million that day or whatever on awards. So the company that backs the credit card, you know, kept on calling, you know, because of the fraud alert, because they had all these perpetual $60,000 slot, you know, 51 people won $63,000 or whatever, you know, so it's like they're constantly being pinged. But it was funny, but it just shows you that you know, the government could do a lot with what's there. I mean, the OTAs and other things are sort of like workarounds or potential alternative models, but that was the silver model that they did that. And now will the Navy and the Army and other folks follow? I mean, I would think so. They were all there looking and whatnot, so I think he was definitely, he's definitely a pathfinder. I mean, he's...
Hey, Greg, if you don't mind me clarifying one thing, you used an important word there, and that was grant.
Yeah.
Right? But on the DoD side, they don't do grants.
Yeah,
So
true, yeah, right.
The SBIR world is divided into 2 parts.
Okay.
The NIH model is a grant.
Okay.
The DoD model and other agencies like them are contracts with deliverables,
Yeah.
right? Like Greg said. So you are submitting a design concept of, you know, work that you're going to perform, right? And you're going to make a deliverable of a product or a report or something like that. On the grant side, you're doing a scientific study, right? And they're paying you to publish a paper, right, so to speak, and that's it. And you may get progress payments or regular payments, but a grant is their way of reviewing that is more like a journal research paper than it is on engineering design.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's a good point. Yeah.
So I appreciate, you know, for those of you here, the PowerPoint and the video is online on Monday. So you can go back and review number 1. Number 2, since, you know, I've got a pretty steep learning curve here, any feedback on this particular topic and any ideas, I mean, we've got Rick, we've got you, Keith, you know, we've got Jane, you know, we've got folks who, you know, Greg, you know, any feedback, you know, things, bring it to our attention so we can kind of push it out. You know, Kevin's right in the building, so I'm like, you know, near source stuff. I mean, you know, what do you want to outsource it? You know, you'll actually see what's being developed. Let us know and we can help. And on this particular topic, especially because I really feel like, you know, we're sort of a neophyte kind of understanding how it works. But at the end of the day, you know, I'm thinking Charleston Bros is, hey, by the way, you might want to go to Greg Hayes if you've got questions about this, right? And that kind of thing. So it also lets me kind of absorb some information how we can fine-tune some of our products. So I appreciate all of you coming out. Greg's here, and his information will be available, you know, on our site, and we'll push it out on social media as well. So follow us over there; you'll get it. And any suggestions, you know, appreciate it. The next topic for you guys is switching back is to I want to sell on Amazon. You know, I've got a widget we want to sell on Amazon. How do you do it? What do you do it? What are the rules? You know, what not to do? That kind of thing. So that's next Friday, and I do appreciate for those of you who are kind of regulars. Greg was in Washington last week, so we had to kind of push it out a week. And we have just been absolutely buried in the race, the buildings and that kind of thing. So, you know, we do the best to try and get meaningful stuff and then just toss something together. And appreciate y'all coming out tonight. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
And thank you.